We're going to begin our program in about 4 minutes. I'm going to let everyone have a chance to join the webinar. So sit tight for a few minutes. Thank you.
I'm muted.
For all of you just joining us, we're going to begin the program at about 7:04. So just sit tight. We'll begin shortly. Hello. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Tonight we have a fascinating program on the architecture of Stanley D. Anderson presented by Paul Bergmann. My name is Scott Fortman. I'm president of Gibbons Fortman and Associates and president of the Chicago chapter of the Institute of Classical Architecture and Art. I'm excited to present our first and hopefully continuing collaboration with the Benjamin Marshall Society. The ICAA is the leading national nonprofit organization dedicated to advancing the practice and appreciation of the classical and vernacular traditions in architecture and the allied arts. This is done primarily through education, publication, advocacy, and our awards program. The organization is a valued educational resource for students, design professionals, and the public at large. The ICAA's focus is on traditional principles that are universal: proportion, balance, scale, and beauty, forms inspired by nature and the human body, incorporating handcrafted materials and art that result in thoughtfully designed spaces that feel comfortable, familiar, and inspirational. The desire for these principles is what draws us together to the ICAA and to events like this. Like many organizations, we shifted this year's programming to an all virtual format. Our ongoing weekly virtual sketching series has been a big hit. Each week we feature a new subject and provide reference images on Monday for the selected building or focus, and then we post the images on social media. I'm continuing to be amazed at the talent and creativity of the submissions. October, we held a well-received virtual panel discussion entitled The Art of Collaboration with architect Phil Liederbach, interior designer Frank Ponterio, and landscape architect Ed Hollander. And most recently, we held our 8th annual Acanthus Awards, celebrating the best in contemporary, classical, and traditional design in the Chicago area. If you haven't seen it, I encourage you all to visit our website or YouTube. We're currently working on other virtual events for the upcoming season, including a virtual watercolor workshop with Craig Farnsworth, a panel discussion on Daniel Burnham and the Burnham Plan, and a potential behind-the-scenes tour of Prague Castle in the Czech Republic. Please visit our website at classicistchicago.org for more details on this and future events and the benefits of membership. If you don't remember the web address, just search ICAA Chicago. I'd like to introduce Stephen B. Mons. After attending Augustana College and DePaul University, Stephen had a successful career in real estate, including real estate law, residential appraisals, sales, development, and consulting. Steve is a contributing member to the Lake Forest Preservation Foundation, a member of the Lake Forest Lake Bluff History Museum, Lake Forest Open Lands, and the Kahlo Foundation of Park Ridge. Originally from Lake Forest, he currently resides in East Lakeview and is a member of the executive committee and lead docent and lecturer for the Benjamin Marshall Society. Steve?
Good evening. I'm just going to say a few words regarding the Benjamin Marshall Society. It was organized in the year 2002, formed in 2002 by Jane LaPoe, our president, and her husband Didier LaPoe. One of the things we realized at the time is Benjamin Marshall has a lot of buildings throughout the United States, but particularly Chicago, iconic buildings, and people were in them all the time, going by them all the time, and had no idea who the architect was. So there was a need to teach people and appreciate what he did. For instance, he did the Drake Hotel in Chicago, the Blackstone Hotel. He did theaters, country clubs. He did 5 of the 8 buildings on East Lakeshore Drive, which was the beginning of our Chicago's skyline. He did country estates. For those of you in New York, he would be comparable residential buildings to Rosario Candela. He basically took a country estate and put it in a big building with a service wing, a formal wing, and a family wing, and got wealthy people to live in multi-unit dwellings. When safe, the Benjamin Marshall Society is planning some great things coming up in 2021, and I mean safe with COVID. Don't be scared. And we will be doing more programs like this, I hope, in affiliation with ICAA. But right now I'm going to go on and tell you just a little bit about Paul Bergmann. The book is The Architecture of Stanley D. Anderson. It's a definitive book on Stanley D. Anderson's work. After World War II, he partnered with Bill Bergmann, who then kind of took over, and they both had big participation in Lake Forest in particular. And of course, our Paul Bergmann tonight is his son. Paul is an attorney, Paul Bergmann, and he's a lifelong resident of Lake Bluff, which is next to Lake Forest. And he started working in Stanley D. Anderson's business when he was in 5th grade. He did filing work and detailed drawings of flat files, an estimated 10,000 drawing collection, which I believe Paul has all of that. He moved on to secretarial work and office work at the firm. Now, he is a board member of the Lake Bluff History Museum. He is a past board member of the Lake Forest Preservation Foundation and the Ella Farm Foundation. He travels a lot. He likes Mexico and Canada fishing, and he travels with his partner, Jan Gibson, a mutual friend. I'd like to pass it on to Paul Bergmann with this wonderful book available as of today, I heard from bookstores. Paul, please tell us all about Stanley Anderson.
Great, Stephen, thank you so much. Scott, thank you. And it's been a long time putting this book together. It's been a lot of fun going through all of the files. I knew even as a small child, even as a youngster, that there were a lot of really great buildings in the drawing collection. So as we get started here, I want to introduce you to our architects. In the center, we have Stanley Anderson, about 1946. On the right, we have Jim Ticknor at a college reunion in 1942. He was Stanley's partner from the beginning, from 1925 until about 1941 or so, when he set up his own practice in Glencoe, Illinois. Stanley went off to World War II. Stanley was a veteran of both World Wars. And when he came home in 1945, he reopened his office, and my father, Bill Bergmann, joined him in 1946. And just for context, Stanley is essentially a generation younger than Benjamin Marshall, and Bill Bergmann is a generation younger than Stanley Anderson. So to give you sort of a time continuity there. And as we get started here, I want to give you a little direction as to where we're going. I've broken our lecture into parts so that you can follow the transitions in the firm's work. And I'm not going to show you all 15 chapters of the book. We don't have that much time. But the point is, with Stanley Anderson, there's always more work. The firm was very prolific. So we're going to spend some time looking at the English Village, of how Stanley transformed downtown Lake Forest. Then we're going to move into the country Georgian era, which I've broken into two time periods, the early Depression era and then the later Depression era up to the beginning of World War II. Then we're going to shift gears a little bit and take a look at Lake Forest High School as a singular building. And we're going to get into the weeds a little bit there, which I'm finding most people are enjoying. Then my dad joins the firm in 1945, and between my dad and Bill and Stanley Anderson, they recreate Lake Forest once again. Stanley dies in 1960, and so then we have the Bill Bergmann years after that. So we start with the English Village. In 1919, Stanley came home from World War I and went to work for Howard Van Doren Shaw. He would have been quite familiar with Shaw's Market Square, which was built from 1912 to 1916. In the 5 years after Stanley went into business in 1925, Stanley greatly enlarged Shaw's concept of a city beautiful style village in Lake Forest with his own English Village concept. Now in this slide, this is about 1905, 1906 downtown Lake Forest. And the large building that you see in the center left is the Anderson family building. The family ran a dry goods store on the first floor, and the second floor was an open meeting room for town meetings and dances. Stanley's father, Will, ran the dry goods store. But I want you to also focus in on the higgledy-piggledy collection of storefronts that you see. Anderson wanted to change this. He wanted downtown Lake Forest to look like an English village that would have dated from about 1800, 1810. And he wanted to do this with a combination of Tudor, Gothic, and Georgian buildings. And this is a headline from the Chicago Tribune. It says, like a bit o' High Street in some Yorkshire village. And this is in 1926 when they unveiled the rendering for the Deerpath Theater building. And this really defines what he's trying to do. He's trying to create a bit of high street in Lake Forest. So the first building that he builds is this little Georgian building. On the very far right, you can see the Anderson Trust building. And on the far left, you're going to see the Deerpath Theater building. But in the center of these, he puts what we call the East of Theater building. And it's a little Georgian building that connects, that's going to connect all of the buildings. And this is part of Stanley's desire to build this prosperous English village. The next building that he builds in 1926 is the Frye and Udell building, done in a Tudor style. Frye was a local plumber, and Udell was a local printer. And Udell planted the Lake Forester, amongst other things. The next building he builds at the same time is the C.T. Gunn Building. This was a grocery store. Later, it was an A&P grocery store. And this building is remarkable in that it has been heavily remodeled several times. Originally, it only had 2 gables, and the hooded door with stone surround was between the 2 gables. The door, with all of its masonry, was moved to the left side of the building in 1933. In the 1980s, the building was again substantially revised, now with a 3rd gable seen on the far right. And even though this building has been extensively remodeled, it retains its essential Stanley Anderson essence. The next building that he builds, this is all at the same time, he's building this many buildings. This small storefront building has been many stores over time, and it is on Bank Lane next to the Market House restaurant. And this is part of Anderson's efforts to connect the Deerpath Inn, a major hotel in Lake Forest, to the south, to Market Square, Shaw's first shopping center in the United States, to the north. And Anderson is converting Bank Lane into an English mews, that narrow back street little corridor that one finds in the older parts of London. From there, as we move up Bank Lane, we get to the Deerpath Theater building. And this is part of that visual connection of the Deerpath Inn, 1 block to the south, and Market Square, a block to the north, and really forms the basis of Bank Lane being the connector between the 2 areas of Lake Forest. And this is the inside, this is the theater. And many of us who grew up in Lake Forest, Lake Bluff and Lake Forest, remember either Saturday mornings as a kid watching movies, or later in our lives being a teenager and going on dates to the movie theater. And sadly, this interior was gutted in the 1980s. The next building that's part of the English Village is the Northern Trust Bank. This is the first of the country Georgian buildings that Anderson designed. It is directly across the street from the Tudor-style Deerpath building I just showed you. And this building forms a further connection to the Deerpath Inn to the south. And this is a rendering for a building that was proposed but not built. The J. Fred Hell building would have stood at the corner of Illinois Road and Bank Lane. It would have faced the Deerpath Inn, and this elevation would have been seen on Bank Lane. It would have completed the Mews connection on Bank Lane from Market Square to the Deerpath Inn. And I have the feeling that if this building had been completed, we'd all be walking around in Lake Forest speaking with English accents. Now, having shown you most of the English Village concept, we can take a look at a few of the houses that he's building. And we're going to change gears here just a little bit. This is truly an English Tudor style house. As you can see, the classic exposed beams and stucco, which is called wattle and daub if you're in England. A friend of mine says that these 1920s houses in England are called mock Tudors to distinguish them from the real 16th century Tudor houses. And this is one of my favorite houses in the Anderson collection. Now, as we move around to the rear of the house, I want to show you the rows. Can you see the small bay window on the 2nd floor, which is called an oriel window? An oriel window doesn't reach all the way to the ground. And it was a very popular design device in 16th century England. And if we look at the bottom of the oriel window, here is a plaster Tudor rose. And how would you like to have this rose always blooming in your garden? This is part of Anderson's sense of whimsy, is to include these small details. Now we move on to the Leavell house. And while we're looking at this, I want you to admire the gate that's in the middle of the photograph. This is a French Norman style house, which is a cousin to English Tudor. And I always think of it as being a bit more rounded and a bit more romantic in its styling. And now I want to take you through that little garden gate. And here's a view just peeking through the gate into the courtyard. And notice the iron gate. Also notice the beautiful stair tower. French Norman houses are country houses and tend to be fortresses as well as elegant homes. So here is a picture of the galleried living room. And I'm showing you this view from the main floor
and you can see the huge trussed ceiling that it has. And here's the reverse view, standing in the gallery and looking through the trusses. I have a 1920s book in the Anderson Library describing how to design French trusses. So Stanley is trying to emulate the French style of doing truss works as closely as he can. Simultaneously, Stanley is working with a man named Henry Turnbull to launch Deerpath Hill Estates, which is a subdivision that they designed in 1926. We know this area today as Kingmere Road at Deerpath, and the Depression is not going to be easy for Henry Turnbull. So this is Deerpath Hill Estates at Kingmere at Deerpath as it looked in 1927. And it has its very distinctive gates and a house in the back that ended up earning the nickname Big Frenchy, as Stanley was very proud of his French style provincial architecture. And Stanley worked on the subdivision in the 1920s. He didn't build all of the houses in the development. And the project went bankrupt in 1932. And then I placed this neighborhood on the National Historic Register in 2006. This next house is the house that Henry Turnbull gave to Anderson when Turnbull went broke in 1932. He owed Anderson enough money that he just simply gave him a house to pay off the debt. And Anderson and Anderson's wife, Marty, lived here until his death in 1960. And one of the little follies that you find in Deerpath Hill Estates is this romantic circle gate that's at the end of one of the cul-de-sacs. It's sometimes called a moon gate. And this gate has actually been hidden for many years in a copse of trees and bushes, which was too bad until it was remodeled extensively about 3 or 4 years ago. And now we move into the country Georgian era. When the stock market crashed in October 1929, the world changed forever. The English cottage styles that we've just seen and the French Norman style die out in popularity almost immediately. So this is the first of Anderson's most well-known country Georgian buildings. This is the first National Bank building done in 1930. It's very high, it's done in a very high Georgian style, and it's part of the English village that I just showed you. And I want you to take a look at the triangular form on the face of the bank. For the non-architects in the audience, this form is called a pediment in architectural terms, and we are going to see this form throughout the rest of this program. Whenever I'm in downtown Lake Forest, I always try and walk through the main banking room at Lake Forest Bank. It is such an elegant room. It was originally paneled in oak paneling, and the Northern Trust painted the wood in the 1990s. Now, if you have a few minutes, go down the lobby stair and admire the beautiful wrought iron gates that are in the vault area. And now we come to King Bruwaert. While the bank was an important commission for a firm, there is an even more important building in the Stanley Anderson collection. As the Depression closed in, Georgian architecture became very popular. And this is King Bruwaert. That is the design base and refinement for Stanley's extraordinarily popular country Georgian style. When Suzanne King Bruwaert died in 1928, she left an extensive trust fund, approximately $4 million, to build and endow a home for elderly women. Her endowment for this 80-room retirement home was for spinsters of gentle birth and good breeding, as the Tribune Send-Up Highland reads. What that really means is over the age of 60, widow or unmarried, and without funds. Women who were admitted here lived here for free. This is the front facade of King Bruwaert. It was begun in 1932 at the very bottom of the Depression. And here you can see the formal temple front with its triangular pediment over the entrance. And notice the oculus window and small dormers. This is part of the highly developed sense of scale that the firm used. This is a huge facility, but it doesn't look overpowering. You like the size of the building because it seems appropriately scaled. In this slide, you get a better view of the pediment and oculus window. And I also want you to notice the swan's neck scroll over the front door. Anderson, Ticknor, Bergmann, and the draftsmen in the firm would describe country Georgian as what we might classify as American colonial, federal, English Georgian, or Regency in design. All of these forms would fit into their definition of country Georgian. They understood they were mixing a lot of designs with their phrase country Georgian. Now here's a side view of the building to give you a sense of the building's size. And notice the three different types of wall designs. On the left, stone; in the center, brick; and then on the right, stone with shingles up above. This gives the impression that the building was built at different times, when it is fact, it is all one building. And this is part of that country Georgian style. And King Bruwaert is now a co-ed facility, and I am told it's one of the finest retirement homes in the country. And this is Suzanne King Bruwaert. When she was a debutante in the 1880s, she was known for her exquisite and very stylish clothing. Her Titian red hair is also mentioned when describing her as one of the most beautiful debutantes of the times. She married Edmond Bruwaert, a French diplomat, after meeting him at the 1893 exhibition. The wind vane was designed by Anderson and is part of his whimsy. He is gently chiding Suzanne's high-style dress with the hoop skirt and her love of corgi dogs. And this wind vane is still on one of the side wings at King Bruwaert. And here's a view of the dining room. As you can see, it's a huge room. It has monumental cornices and pediments, and the details are from the early Georgian period. And here you can see the fireplace overmantel. Notice the swan's neck scroll over the fireplace. It matches the swan's neck scroll over the front door. Mrs. Magoon, an English house mistress, ran King Bruwaert in the 1930s and 40s. She required that all the women coming down to dine be fully dressed in skirt, heels, and makeup. If residents didn't want to dress, they would be served in their rooms. This is the great room at King Bruwaert. It's paneled in pine, and you can see the trussed ceiling and monumental fireplace. And down in the basement is a small theater. Its stage is deep enough for performances and also has a screen for showing movies. And notice that this is done with a great deal of Art Deco influence. And as we leave King Bruwaert, we all see the detail of the wrought iron fence work that's in the garden. And this is Lake Forest High School. This is Stanley's third great country Georgian building. I've devoted an entire chapter in the book to the high school, as I thought this would make a good example of the detail work that goes into one of Anderson's buildings. And as I mentioned, as I promised before, we're going to jump into the weeds for just a few moments. There are literally thousands of Lake Forest High School alumni that know that they graduated from a very special school. In 2017, Architectural Digest declared Lake Forest High School to be the prettiest high school in Illinois. That article and similar raves, 85 years after it was built, are a testament to the work that went into the building. And so when a building is designed, it comes with a specifications manual. And Anderson used the manual to enforce an extraordinarily high level of workmanship throughout the entire building process. In the manual are many boring paragraphs following building codes and such. And however, at the end of each of the sections is the following statement: all work shall be done to the satisfaction of the architect. This language, along with the rest of the instructions, states a standard that few contractors would agree to today. Two of those requirements are that mediocre workmanship will not be acceptable to the architect. A second requirement is that all miters and jointing shall be perfect, and all work shall be done to the satisfaction of the architect. Doing things halfway, doing them kind of maybe almost getting there wasn't going to cut it with Stanley Anderson. And this is the main entrance to the door, the main entrance to the school. And here's a drawing of the school as it's executed. Every part of the building was drawn in exacting detail. This main entrance gives you a sense of the detail that's involved. Sections of the building were drawn full size where necessary. And I have drawings in the files that are 4 feet wide and 8 and 10 feet tall. So we get to the masonry specification. The specifications for the masonry work are extraordinarily detailed. They define the color, size, rock face, and in many instances, the placement in the wall for each stone. The mason is allowed almost no discretion in building the face of the wall. And here we see a picture of the lintels, and the lintels over the doors and windows form a sense of masonry beauty all of their own. For the school, Anderson defined how each stone lintel was to be built. And here you see the lintels as drawn, and you see the lintels as executed. He specified the width of each stone in the arches, as well as the height and intersection of the horizontal stonework. Then we get to the brickwork. The details for the brickwork is as exacting as the detail for the stonework. Ground brick means that the edge of each side of the brick is cut from a rectangular shape to a trapezoidal shape. And here are the many brick lintels that are defined in one drawing. Each of the bricks shown in this drawing is ground or shaped to conform to the fan or arch. Each one is hand cut. And here are 2 windows showing the bricks in fan shape, and above them the drawing provided to the masons to shape the bricks. The masons would grind or shape the bricks at their shop and stand them on the drawing to make sure they complied with the directions. On the flat lintel on the right, notice the brick intersections with the horizontal bricks. And remember, the work had to be perfect, and it had to be done to the satisfaction of the architect. This is a hand-carved urn that is placed in the woodwork at the school. The drawing provides the exact details of how it is to be executed. In the woodworking section, under the heading Quality of Workmanship, is the statement, all cabinet work shall be of the highest grade of fine cabinet work known to the cabinet maker's trade. And further in this section is the statement, mediocre work will not be acceptable to the architect. So as we say goodbye to the high school, you have a better sense of the level of detail work that goes into an Anderson building. And now we're going to take a look at some of the houses from this era. The first house is the Walter Wecker House. This sits on 7.5 acres or so in Bannockburn, Illinois. And Walter Wecker was the president of the Marquette Cement Company. And during his leadership, he expanded the company to become a major cement dealer across the upper Midwest. And this is the side view of the house. And I want to emphasize this house is designed by Jim Ticknor. And this turned out to be a life's work for him. Ticknor designed every aspect of this house and then remodeled it for more than 40 years. So as we go inside, here's the central hallway. The door on the right is the living room. On the left is the stairwell. And directly ahead is the dining room. As we go into the living room, notice the paneled wall surrounding the fireplace. On the left is a door to the garden. And on the right is a cozy window seat. And the window seat has a radiator underneath it, so it would be nice and warm on a winter's day. And here are two views of the outside. Mrs. Wecker had extensive gardens. And according to newspaper articles of the time, she had several acres of rose gardens. And on the left is the greenhouse, and on the right is her tea garden. And Ticknor designed the tea garden also. And now we come to the McIlvaine house, also done in 1935. Stanley and Marty were good friends with the McIlvaines and played cards and dined often. In 1935, the McIlvaines visited cousins in Owings Mills, Maryland, to watch the Maryland Cup horse race. They stayed at Stemmer House, a 1730s house for which this house is modeled. And the Stemmer House and this house both include the half gables, which add to its distinctive look. And this is the stair hall. You'll notice that the floor is covered in hard tiles. Mrs. McIlvaine was quite a horsewoman and had her Stanley Anderson designed stable just next door. Often riders would enter the house in riding boots, and the hard tile floor was easy to clean and resisted scratching. Here's a picture of the McIlvaine living room, and you can see the very formal design of the room with its elegant fireplace and elegant cornices. And so that sort of ends the early Depression years, and we're going to now shift into the slightly later era, and also gives everybody a little chance to pause here because I'm giving you a lot of images to look at. The country Georgian style in this period begins to change. It gets lighter and more refined, and the houses get a little bit smaller in style. But first we start, sadly, with Lake Forest Hospital. This is the fourth of Stanley's monumental Georgian structures, and it was replaced in 2019 with a new hospital. So this building has been demolished. The hospital construction was begun just as World War II broke out, and it got special permission from the federal government to requisition building supplies to allow it to finish in 1942. And this is the rear view of the hospital prior to my father making many additions to this building. On the right, you see a convalescent porch for patients to use. In the center, you see a porch for guests to use so they can come out into this lovely garden. And on the right, you see a porch that the nurses used when the nurses were housed inside the building. And this is an annual baby day party photograph. This is taken about 1958, 1959. And in the background, you can see the new 1957 addition to the hospital with yet again another pediment and oculus window. And the white shape that you see on the end of the building was a convalescent porch, which turned out to be extraordinarily popular. And so now we move on to twin doors. And this is one of Anderson's most fun projects. It is two houses that face each other on a courtyard. It also has a gardener's cottage that is down the hill. This house was built for Bill and Nikki Clow. It was a second marriage for both of them, and each brought late teenage, early college-age children to the marriage. The property has two houses with matching front doors. The house you're looking at is the main house where the parents lived, and they lived a very formal, very sedate life with a butler, cooks, and maids. And this is the kids' house, and the kids would stay here when they came home from school. And you can see that it has the mirror image front door as across the courtyard. Now the fun begins when we go inside. This is called the big room. The interior of the kids' house is designed to mimic a Wisconsin Northwoods lodge. The walls you see are the exterior walls. The room has no insulation, just like a Northwoods lodge. It is heated with fireplaces and the wall heaters that you see in this picture. The room also came equipped with every toy a 1940s college-age kid would need. Every type of racket and club, tennis rackets, golf clubs, boat oars, paddles, guns for bird hunting, a big Wurlitzer jukebox, a bar, and anything else you could think of. And wouldn't you like to have lived here when you were 22? Now here's the front door to the main house. The kids' house did not have a kitchen, only a small kitchenette. The kids were expected to dress for dinner each night. Shine shoes, jacket, and tie for the boys, and heel, skirt, and makeup for the girls. They would walk across the courtyard, knock on this door, and the butler would let them in. So as we go inside, here's the central hallway. I want you to notice the delicate mullions in the transom window. The wallpaper is by Gracie and imported from Hong Kong. My parents were good friends with Sylvia and Milt, which were Nikki's children, and they went to many cocktail and dinner parties here. And my father said he always came home early from work to change his shirt and polish his shoes before visiting the Clows. This is the Clows dining room. The wallpaper is a flowering cherry tree blossoms. It is hand painted and also imported from Hong Kong. Here's the butler's pantry. The butler plated the meals before serving them into the dining room. The Clow house had 5 live-in servants. This is for 2 parents. It has a cook, a cook's helper, a butler, several maids, and a gardener chauffeur. And now we're going to move into the post-World War II era. My dad joined the firm in 1946 and became a partner in 1949. Ticknor moved on to open up his own shop in Glencoe, Illinois, about 15 miles or so south of Lake Forest. My dad brought with him a taste for mid-century modern design, which is going to alter the country Georgian design. But the first building we get to is the administration building for the Ridge Farm Preventorium. This is a pre-tuberculosis school and farm for kids. It's now part of the Grove School Cultural Campus operated by the city of Lake Forest. And this is one of the first buildings that Bergmann designed for the firm. Now, at the same time, they are beginning to remodel most of downtown Lake Forest. And in the 1950s, Bergmann began building a lot of storefronts to match, in many ways, all of the buildings that Anderson had done in the 1920s. And this is one of the first of a handful of storefronts he did. The H.T. Strenger Plumbing Company. This is now Ferrantino's Pizza Parlor. But another building he did was Robertson's Clothing Store, done in 1954. And this was considered a very chic store when it opened, and it supported a very wide clientele of Lake Foresters. And this is an exterior view taken at night, and then an interior view of the store. Then in 1955, Bergmann also designed the Edward Sims House. This is a mid-century modern style house in Lake Bluff, and is on the intersection of 2 ravines. It has almost no tableland to it. And so here's a picture of the living room. The house was designed for a dedicated amateur classical musician. It has very high ceilings for better classical music acoustics, and the owner hosted Mozart and Beethoven quartets on a regular basis. You can see the living room is mid-century modern simple. There are no cornices or details. The only ornamentation in the room is the redwood beams and the floor-to-ceiling glass windows. But then here's Bergmann's design for the house for Mrs. Huntington Henry. This is a French provincial house built for Mrs. Henry and her daughter. And this small jewel of a house sits on almost 2 acres of land in Lake Forest. And it is intentionally small to mimic the small urban 18th century houses found in the environs around Versailles. And let's go inside. Here's the main stair. This is Bergmann's take on a spiral stair. And I want you to look at the beautiful wrought iron stair rail. Bergmann studied French architectural details for several months before beginning design of this house. And here's a detail of the wrought iron stair rail. The wrought iron balusters are all handmade and based on French patterns. As we go into the living room, you can notice that all the moldings, the panel moldings and the cornice moldings are all cast in place plaster moldings. This is a very expensive and almost lost construction technique, rarely done today. And then we take a peek in the kitchen, and I want you to notice that even in the kitchen is this absolute riot of color. With this robin's egg blue, doesn't this seem like just a wonderfully cheery kitchen to be in? The tiles that you see were collected by the owner in France. And this is Stanley's last house. Robert Fisher was a grain and starch miller. He commissioned this house in Keokuk, Iowa, overlooking the Mississippi River. He flew Anderson to the house in his private airplane several times. On the trip to review the final construction details, Anderson had a massive stroke and died in April of 1960. And here's an aerial view of the house overlooking the Mississippi River. With Anderson's death in 1960, the firm name was changed to Stanley D. Anderson Associates, and Bergmann took over as the principal architect, and the firm went on for another 30 years. Bergmann began work on the 580 Bank Building just when Anderson passed away. 580 was considered the largest building in Lake Forest since Market Square was built in 1916. It is built on the site of where Anderson was going to build the J. Fred Held building in 1929. I showed you a rendering of that earlier. And what Bergmann is trying to do is he's trying to maintain the Bank Lane connection that Stanley had envisioned that would connect the Deerpath Inn to Market Square. And so he's trying to maintain the sense of a lane structure and a lovely sidewalk for people to walk through. In 1964, Bergmann designed this new access and public comfort station for Lake Forest Beach. He combined two different architectural concepts for the building and stairs. He used a Beaux-Arts concept of Les Marches for the stairs that progress down from the bluff. He then added a cladding of mid-century modern rusticated concrete blocks without any other ornamentation. He was trying to emphasize the progression or movement from top to bottom of the bluff over the fact that the building is a public restroom. He's trying to make the bluff and the lake seem much more important than the public aid station. And this is the Michael Cudahy house. It's done in Bill Bergmann's sort of 1960s country Georgian design. It's a very understated house on the exterior. However, it's almost a pure Palladian design with a center mass, two connectors, and two flanking wings. And this is his interpretation of country Georgian. And if we take a closer look at the very formal but simple entrance, you can see that there's not a great deal of detailing around the front door. With modernism, there's very little interest in the heavy detailing, but we're going to go inside and see that the interior is much more ornate. So here we get to the living room, and you can see that this is a lovely, huge room to be in with lovely French doors. And then here's the fireplace of the Cudahy house. And notice that the moldings are much more ornate than the exterior trim would indicate. The heavier cornices and lots of casework show the true country Georgian style. And this is the last house we're going to look at this evening. This is the Shirley and Sewell Gardner house. That was done in 1969. And Bergmann and the Gardners called this house their California Modern House. The windows were custom made in California and were the largest thermopane windows available at the time, which is where the California nickname came from. And here's the central stair. Mrs. Gardner was Mrs. Shirley Keith Gardner. Her stepmother was Mrs. Stanley Keith, also known as Mrs. Kersey Coates Reed. Mrs. Reed Keith had a house designed by David Adler on Lake Road. The house famously has Steuben glass balusters. As an homage to her stepmother, Mrs. Gardner used lucite balusters in her stair. And so here we take a final look at the house. This is the living room. And again, another elegantly appointed room. And that brings us to the end of our program here. What I haven't shown you is all of the other chapters. So there's a chapter on the art of remodeling that includes several stable to house conversions. There's a chapter on the horse stables and horse farms. There's another chapter on the vacation homes, including ranches in Montana, lodges in several parts of Canada and Florida, Mississippi, and other parts of the country. There's a chapter on churches. And then surprisingly, I have not seen any other architect do funeral or funerary design work. And so there's a very short chapter on the tombstones and mausoleum work that they did. And so I leave you here with just a little teaser here. There's a picture of one of the stables and a picture of one of the churches in the rest of the book. And so that's my program for you this evening. And I hope you've had a chance to enjoy looking at all of the Stanley Anderson work.
If you have any questions for Paul, if you could put them in through the chat, and if I can then pass them on. So please do so now if you have any questions for Paul.
Yeah, good. I would welcome questions, and I hope you've enjoyed the show.
Well, Paul, apparently you're very thorough.
Well, the book itself has almost 800 images and drawings in it. And so it's got lots and lots of detail to it. And it covers a great range of their work. Surprisingly, for as exhausting as the book may seem with 800 images in it, it's only a part of the work that they did. So it's a firm that was highly prolific.
Paul, I have a question. What of these houses would you like to live in yourself?
That's a question that I find keeps changing on me. So I keep sort of going, depending on my mood, going back and forth from house to house. One of the very first houses I showed you was the Charles Kimball house with the beautiful rose and the oriel window. That's just a beautiful little Tudor style house with beautiful beam ceilings in the living room and whatnot. That would be a nice house to live in. But at the same time, there's other houses. Twin doors would be a ball to live in, especially with the big room on one side of the courtyard and then the main formal house on the other side. And there's many other houses that are just very beautiful that would be nice to be in.
We do have a question about where can the book be purchased. Now, as of today, we were informed the Lake Forest Bookstore has them in stock, but they've also had a lot of people purchasing them. So you might want to call to make sure they hold a copy for you. I'm sure there are other ways to get the book, but I know that as a fact. Lake Forest Bookshop on Western Avenue in Lake Forest.
So if you want to shop local, yes, Lake Forest Bookstore has books in stock as of today. I have an arrangement with them that if you'd like it autographed, if you tell them and are willing to wait an extra day or two, I can go over there in the mornings and autograph some of the books. The book can also be ordered at any other bookstore. So Barnes and Noble and other bookstores like that, they more likely than not will not have it in stock. So you'll have to order it. And then it's also, everything in the world is available at Amazon. And so the book is available also at Amazon. So you have
we like Lake Forest Bookstore. Get it there. So
local.
Paul, a question also, where are the horse farms located?
The bulk of the horse farms are located in what's called the Hunt Country, which is in north central Lake County, Illinois. So about 15 miles north and west of Lake Forest is a road called Hunt Club Road. And on Hunt Club Road is the Hunt Club, designed by David Adler. And then surrounding that are probably 8 or 10 of the horse farms that Stanley Anderson worked on. And if you are at all familiar with the area, you might know the Temple Lipizzans, which is a stud of the Lipizzan horses from Germany. And during the summers, they have Lipizzan horse shows there. So you can visit the stable and walk around the grounds. So there's a huge manor house there and a stable that houses almost 40 horses. It's an enormous stable. And then in 2 miles in one direction is another stable, and 2 miles in another direction is another stable. It's truly the Hunt Country. And so the places are spread out there and are available. And a lot of them are detailed in the book.
Okay. Was there any work done in Barrington Hills? I have a question.
Barrington Hills raises a very, what turned out to me was a very difficult research question. A lot of the work that they did, so all of the work that they did, when I took over trying to catalog the drawings, I inherited 1,700 sets of drawings, all of which do not have any addresses on them. So other than saying that the project was built in Lake Forest, you don't know where the project is built. We have one huge farm built for Charles Garfield King, who is the father of Ginevra King. And Ginevra King is F. Scott Fitzgerald's great love affair, and she is the model for the Great Gatsby book and whatnot. He built a horse farm out in an area only listed on the drawings as near Dundee. So in 1936, when you ask about, well, what about Barrington? Well, Barrington kind of didn't exist in 1936. I mean, it was a very small town. And so their way of addressing that was to say near Dundee. And unfortunately, the Charles Garfield farm has been destroyed. It's been razed. They built another farm a little further south for the Edison Dick family also. So there's a couple of farms in the area. That land was bought by Cook County, and that farm was also subsequently razed also.
Are there any structures that are in danger now, Paul, of being razed?
Yeah, there's sort of a continual flow of houses that, I mean, one of the problems you have from a preservation question altogether is when the value of the land becomes so high in relation to the value of the house, then there's a great deal of interest in going ahead and raising the house. So we're just about to lose a house that my dad designed in the 1950s on Meadow Lane in Lake Forest. And the man who's bought the property is going to raise it and build a 1.5-story house for himself and his wife to retire into. So yes, the other problem that comes up with that is people go in and they'll leave the exterior, but will substantially overhaul the interior. And you can point out to architects and new owners that all of the plaster work that you see in the house is all hand done. It's all hard plasters. None of this is drywall. And they still say, no, sorry, it's all got to go. And so you see a lot of the house interiors changing dramatically also.
The churches, where are they located?
The church you see here on the screen is in Mundelein. It's a congregational church. There's another church done in this. This church is done in the style of St. Martin's in the Field, which is a church in London. That is with the center spire over a triangular pediment form. And so there's another church in very much the same style in Waukegan that was done for the Finnish Lutheran congregation. That church has now become a Baptist church. There's a monumental Baptist church in Waukegan. And then they substantially remodeled a number of churches, an Episcopal church in Waukegan. And for the Lake Foresters, they substantially altered the First Presbyterian Church in Lake Forest. And Stanley and his family were founding members of the Presbyterian Church in Lake Forest.
It looks like I might be running out of questions here.
Okay.
One last one, it looks like. Well, I don't know. This is one I've asked you already. I think one thing I want to remember to mention to everybody, the Benjamin Marshall Society does have a great website to learn more about us. I didn't want to dote on that tonight. It's benjaminmarshallsociety.org, and there's a Facebook presence. So if you want to go on, there's wonderful vintage photographs, information currently, and you can get an idea what he did, and of course, ask questions through that. So I didn't want to forget that. And it doesn't look like I'm getting a lot of thank yous, Paul. I will pass that on.
Well, good. Well, I want to thank the entire audience for participating in this. It's too bad that we can't all be in the same room together. It's so much more fun doing a program like this live. And I certainly want to thank both you and the Benjamin Marshall Society and Scott Foreman and the ICAA for helping to sponsor this. I think this is a great way to get the word out on architectural efforts of people. So thank you to everyone.
Thank you, Paul. And from my part, I hope everybody has a very healthy and happy holiday season.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Mhm.